Hello, and it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you in our audience from around the world to the third talk in our second series of the smash hit Oxford at Home. Oxford at Home, as you know, is a showcase for some of the best research and thinking that's going on around the University of Oxford, even while we here in the UK are going through a second rather rigorous lockdown, which means that we're mostly confined to our homes rather than our offices. For that reason, do remember we are using our own home Wi-Fi, and if there is the occasional cutout here and there, bear with us and we'll be back as soon as we can. But we're hoping for no cutouts today because we have an absolutely fantastic talk, and I'm going to introduce the speaker to you. My name is Rana Mitter. I teach Chinese history here at the university, but my purpose today is to tell you about our speaker today, Dr. Becky Smethurst. Becky is a junior research fellow. That's an extremely competitive research position at Christ Church, one of the more venerable of the colleges of the university, Harry Potter College, as it's known to some, I have to say. And Becky's research focuses on how galaxies and their central supermassive black holes evolve together. But you may know her better from her immensely popular YouTube channel, Dr. Becky, where she posts weekly videos on unsolved mysteries, weird objects in space, and other space news. And her book, Space, 10 Things You Should Know, of which I suspect I knew none, was also named one of the top books of 2019 by Sky at Night magazine. Now, we'll turn to her in just a moment, but just a reminder that you, the audience, are very, very much part of this conversation. So whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on Facebook, on Twitter, or any other method, perhaps beaming in from some extraterrestrial capacity, you can communicate, not necessarily in beeps and tweets, with us today. Please send a message through the various chat functions, and our coordinators and moderators will bring the best of those in, and we'll put them to Dr. Becky after she's given her talk. But high time, I think, to hear about today's talk, Stargazing from Home, some tips during these dark January days of how you can adapt some ideas in the pleasant, we hope in the pleasant surrounds of your own street or garden or meadow, whatever they may be close to you. Could I welcome you, Dr. Becky Smethurst? Becky, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rana. Yes, good morning, everybody, or good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you happen to be. Thank you for spending your precious time with me today. And yes, I am going to be talking to you about how you can enjoy the night sky, because although, yes, we do have very dark nights at the minute, they're sort of, people think they're quite depressing during the long sort of winter nights. In essence, for me as a stargazer, that's fantastic because it means I don't have to stay up till 2 a.m. to see the night sky. I can see it at 6 p.m. just while I'm cooking my dinner at nighttime, for example. And I think that's always a good plus. Just to let you know, this will be quite a Northern Hemisphere focus if there are any of you in the Southern Hemisphere, but all the tips I've got for you is beginner stargazers will still be very, very useful. And I know that a lot of you, if you are beginner stargazers, might feel a little bit lost when you go out in the night sky. Well, that's how I feel when I go to the Southern Hemisphere. I don't recognize anything and I start making up my own constellations and they always end up looking like dinosaurs. I see a lot of stegosauruses throughout the night sky. But before we start thinking about things that we can actually see and things we can spot, I want to teach you first of all about the first rule of stargazing. And the first rule of stargazing is that you need to be somewhere dark. You can see more stars once your eyes have adjusted and become dilated, like in the picture there on the left hand side. So compare sort of when you go to bed and you first switch off the light, the big light, or your little nightstand light, whatever it might be, and you can barely see anything in the room. But if you wake up in the middle of the night and you open your eyes, you can see a lot, and that's because your eyes have adjusted to the darkness. So if you try and go from, say, the bright lights of your kitchen to outside in the garden and straight away go from looking at that bright light in your kitchen to trying to see tiny pinpricks of light from the stars that are trillions of miles away, your eyes are going to struggle. So I need you to do two things. I either need you to just stand in the dark of your kitchen for 5 minutes before you go outside, and then you will see more stars and it'll be more spectacular when you step out, or you need to spend a longer time outside, which if you do, you need to wrap up warm and everything like that to let your eyes adjust. I personally think it's more spectacular to just sort of stand in the dark and hum a song to yourself for 5 minutes before you head outside, because it is just more spectacular. You see more stars, whereas if you go out and then let your light adjust, you sort of don't notice that gradual change as more and more stars appear. It's not as sort of spectacular as that first sort of step. outside. So make sure you give the night sky enough attention to actually be able to enjoy it. Now, a quick glance up after looking at your phone screen, for example, is not going to do much. So once we get out there, though, what are we going to see? Well, I think the first thing that, the easiest thing that everyone wants to find, obviously, in the sky is the moon. Now, most people will look at the moon when it's a full moon, because full moon can be very spectacular. It's very, very bright. But the thing is, that's not actually the best time to look at the full moon, because it is so bright. There's no contrast there. So you actually lose a lot of the detail. The best time to look is actually when it's a half moon or a crescent moon, because those kind of moons actually have something that we call the terminator. So that is the line along the moon where you go from day to night side on the moon. It's the shadow cast by the sun, where you're receiving light from the sun and where you're not getting any light from the sun. And that's where we see all of the detail. That shadow casts relief along all of the craters on the moon. So if you have binoculars, maybe you've done a bit of bird watching in your time, or you've bought them for sporting events or something, if you have them lying around your house, break them out of whatever drawer they've been dumped in and point them at the moon when the moon is half or a crescent moon. You will see so much detail. It really is truly spectacular. I think the first time I ever did that, I really did sort of have a shocked intake of breath about how much you can actually see on the surface of the moon. Plus, nights with full moons are actually not good for stargazing either, because they are so bright. So they wash out a lot of the stars. New moon or a crescent moon is the best because it's darker, but also because if it's a crescent moon or a new moon, it's not up most of the night anyway. And so the night is actually dark because the moon is already set. Again, you can see more stars. It'll be more spectacular. But the moon can be very useful because it allows us to find other things. So if you know the moon is going to be close to something that's interesting, then that's the best way to start off as a beginner stargazer. When someone says, oh, look for this in the north or the south, and you go, well, where on earth is it? I'm not entirely sure. If I say look for the moon, you can find that and then jump from there. So having said that, I have something for you that's going to be visible tonight and tomorrow night. So I've given you 2 nights just in case. We never know what the weather's going to do at this time of year, especially in the UK in January, right? But it's clear outside right now. So fingers crossed it stays clear as well. Because the moon tonight and tomorrow is going to be very close to Pleiades, the star cluster. So this is an area where a lot of stars have all formed very close together. And so they clump together in this tiny little area of space, but you can see it with the naked eye. So see if you can pick out the moon either tonight or tomorrow. And if you're looking tonight, then sort of just go a little bit up from there. And if you're looking tomorrow, then just go a little bit to the right of there and see how many stars you can actually see in that little area of sky. It's one of these things that has been used throughout history, supposedly by many different cultures as an eye test. So depending how many stars that you could actually see in that little region of sky would suggest, what you were supposed to be doing with the rest of your life. So, sort of young children would be tested and said, can you see 6 or 7 or 8 stars? And those who could see the most would have the best eyesight and would go on to work as a hunter or a warrior for those societies, for example. So if you want to test for your eyes, make sure you look at it in the evening, because this is one of these things that's up just after the sun sets and probably sets around about 2 a.m. So you've got plenty of time to try and spot this, amongst the lockdown schedule of Zoom calls and all sorts at the minute. So have a look for it. It looks a little bit like a mini plow. So the constellation of the plow, that's kind of what it looked like. And again, if you have binoculars or a telescope, it's one of those things that will look absolutely spectacular. Like you'll be able to see, between 6 to 8 stars with the naked eye, with just your eye. But if you get binoculars on it, you'll be shocked at not just how many stars appear, but also the fact that you can sort of see this gas that's illuminated by the stars as well. You can see that it's what we call nebulous, this sort of Latin word that means sort of like cloudy as well, which is the gas left over from these stars actually forming. So I love this area of sky. I love how much astrophysics is just contained in one such tiny little area. Speaking of the constellation of the plow, though, as this little thing looks like, I want to talk about the plow now, because I feel like the plow is a constellation that a lot of people can pick out, or at least it's perhaps the first constellation they learn to spot. And people, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, it's one of those constellations that is very familiar. It's very recognizable because it's quite big and quite obvious because it's very bright in terms of its stars. It's always roughly in the north as well. Usually people know if they have a south or a north facing garden. So hopefully that should help you figure out which way to look from your house, or which window from your house to look out of to be able to spot this. And one thing I want to point out about constellations while we're here is that although these make very recognizable shapes in the sky and they do appear very close together, the stars in them are actually trillions of miles apart. They have actually nothing to do with each other. So we put together an installation last year at the physics department open day where we hung little baubles from the ceiling and put lights in them to show the shape of the plow at a very specific location in the room. There was one spot on the floor that if you stood there, that would be like standing on Earth and seeing this pattern of the constellation of the plow. But you can see that as you then start to move around the room, that shape completely disappears, because in fact the stars are, the nearest and the furthest are separated by something like hundreds of light years, meaning it takes light traveling at 30 million meters per second, hundreds of years to travel that distance, right? So they have absolutely nothing to do with each other, these stars. They're nowhere near each other in space, unlike the Pleiades, which they all form together in that very condensed area of space. It reminds me a little bit of the old Channel 4 adverts, those that remember them, where there was all those cranes that looked like they were making just a mess in the sky, but as you moved around, eventually you'd see the big four, right? That's kind of what constellations are like, and I think this video really shows that nicely. So once you've found the plow in the sky and you know what you're looking at what appears to us as this nice shape. Obviously, they have nothing to do with each other, these stars. I want you to look at one of the stars in the handle of the plow, because I think what you'll be able to see is that star is not actually one star, it's two stars. And they're called Mizar and Alcor. And again, if you can pick those two out with your eyes, it means you have excellent eyesight, and that you're also probably in a very dark sky, because the second star is a little bit faint. For those of you sort of in city areas, you might struggle, but again, binoculars break them out and you will be able to spot that. And I think that's just a really fun little fact about the plow, something that is so recognizable to have that sort of be like, oh, actually, that's two stars. It's really cool. Zooming out a little bit now, but sticking on the plow. The plow, it can be very, very useful for navigating your way around the sky. And this is obviously something that's key to sort of taking the steps from becoming a beginner stargazer to maybe someone who's more familiar with the sky. If you can sort of wend your way around the sky from something you do know to something you don't know as well, for example. So what you can actually do is use the two stars on the edge of the plow, so that the pan of the plow, to actually navigate up to the North Star. So if you draw a line between those two stars, and then you carry on from there about 3 times the distance, you'll see that very, very bright star at the top. That is Polaris, the North Star, the star that the North Pole of Earth just happens to point to. It's a coincidence that there happens to be a star in that exact direction. There isn't a star in the direction of the South Pole, for example. But what it means for us in the Northern Hemisphere is that all year round, it appears that other stars in the sky appear to be moving around Polaris, the North Star, throughout the night. And you can see as well how the plow traces around Polaris, and so how those two stars in the panhandle always point at Polaris as well. So whatever time of night you go out to look, you can always find Polaris this way. And this is why the North Star was so important to sailors navigating the ocean throughout history, right? Because as you can see, it's the only star that doesn't move. It always stays directly above north. You can see the cardinal directions at the bottom there in red. And so that was obviously incredibly useful if you didn't have a compass. So when you go out tonight, if you can find the plow, something recognizable, maybe try and use it to navigate to somewhere you don't know as well, and Polaris, the North Star, and find it. Jumping to a different constellation now, another well-known constellation is Orion. And at this time of the year in the northern sky, the winter sky, it's spectacular, right? It rises just after sunset, so it's very obvious in the evening sky, which is obviously the sky that we see the most. And then it sets around midnight again, so it's very visible in sort of the visible times that we're actually looking at the sky. And most people know it for Orion's belt, right? Very easy to spot. And again, another one that people learn to spot first, or very early on, sort of in the days of looking at the sky. People might be quite familiar with it as well. But Orion's belt is not the whole constellation of Orion. Amazingly enough, the belt is actually just one piece of the hunter Orion. It's supposed to look like a hunter in the sky. If I put on sort of the constellation lines, you'll see that now. You can see he's sort of got a sword in one hand raised above his head, and he's also got a bow and arrow pointing outwards in his other hand. And then you've got his two shoulders above it, and then his 2 feet below it. And you'll see that on one of his shoulders is a star called Betelgeuse, and it looks a little redder in color than the rest of the stars around it. Now, that's not just something on the software I'm using. You can actually see that with your naked eye. It's one of the sort of first questions that I remember asking my parents when I was younger was, why does that star look a different color to the rest? And they didn't necessarily know. And that massively sparked my curiosity. And it's red because it's a red giant star. So if the sun was the size of a tennis ball, Betelgeuse would be the size of the London Eye. It's huge. And the reason it's so huge is because it's nearing the end of its life. It's running out of fuel, so it's swollen up to try and prevent its collapse or its supernova at the end of its life. And it's thought to be very close to that point. It started dimming last year, and people got very excited, thinking that might be an imminent supernova. And if that was to happen, we'd be able to even see it in the daytime sky. It would, be bright enough that even despite the sun, we'd still be able to see it. So people got very excited, but then nothing happened, and it's back to its normal brightness now as well. So if you can get out tonight and you can spot it, spot it while you can, because we should all keep an eye on this one, because we never know when it might go supernova and come to the end of its life. Once again, if you have binoculars or a telescope, look below Orion's belt. So you might be treated then to a view of the Orion Nebula, which again is an area of sky where there's lots of stars forming, this big region of hydrogen gas that eventually will collapse and be the fuel to make more stars. And you can see it's very beautiful color, has this pinkish glow that we associate with hydrogen gas, and there's lots going on there. It's a very beautiful sight to be able to see. Even if you want to point your smartphone in that direction, your smartphone on a 3 or a 10-second exposure that you can do with most smartphones these days on the camera app, should actually pick out that sort of little fuzzy patch underneath Orion's belt as well. So there's lots going on in and around Orion, and it's this huge constellation to explore. So if that's what you can recognize, maybe do a little bit of research and find out what else there is to view around Orion. But I want to highlight now something that is one of my favorite sights to see, especially in the winter sky, because surrounding Orion are some of the 6 brightest stars in the winter sky, and they're known as the winter hexagon or the winter circle. So again, if we just zoom out a little bit here now, so that we can actually see Orion, the moon, and the Pleiades again. We can see Mars is visible too. We can see, the lines are already drawing themselves. And we start at Orion's belt and we head down to Orion's foot on the right, and we find that the blue star that's called Rigel. We then go down to Sirius, up to Procyon, to Pollux, across to Capella, and down to another red star called Aldebaran, and back to Rigel. And you'll see that it rings right round the constellation of Orion, and they're incredibly, incredibly bright on the sky. So it's something that once you know they're there, and once you've been able to pick them out, it's something that you will definitely be able to see again. Now, if you're struggling with it, again, on Monday night, so Monday the 25th of Jan, the moon is going to be smack bang in the middle of this winter hexagon. So it's going to be an ideal time to look for it. And so it'll make knowing where to look just that bit easier. And actually, if you're still struggling, if you think, I'm not going to be able to pick that out, I'm not going to be able to spot that in the sort of southern or southeastern sky, if you have a southern facing garden, this is the kind of time to look for this. Then download one of these free star chart apps as well. Phone apps now, if you get your phone, you can point it at the sky and it'll tell you exactly what you're looking at. It uses the sort of the technology in your phone to know where you are on the earth and know at which angle you're pointing, and you can click on things and it'll tell you what it is. That's a good way to get very familiar with what's going on in the sky, and just to check that the hexagon you found is necessarily the winter hexagon, as it's called. Because I guarantee you, once you've seen it and once you found it in the sky, you will not be able to stop seeing it. It'll be something that just jumps out of you so obviously. And it'll almost be easier to see in a light polluted sky because they're so bright. the stars that you can see in the background here that are much fainter, they'll almost disappear in the light pollution. And so it'll be really easily that it'll just sort of jump out at you, this hexagon, to be able to spot tonight. And you might even be lucky enough to snap a picture like this by Jeff Dye that really does reveal everything that's going on in that area of sky. When I was talking about with Orion being such a sort of chock full constellation in terms of things to see in the sky. But to me, seeing the winter hexagon, it just becomes such a comforting and familiar sight in the night sky every single winter, that despite the long nights, especially in January, February, you know, when you're in that sort of post-Christmas sort of blues phase, it is something that is almost nostalgic in a way, and it is very comforting and familiar to me. So have a look for it and see if you can spot this. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, that is what the night sky is to me. It's, you know, an old friend that I can come back to all the time, that when I look up, I both recognize things and I see new things as well. You know, even though I spend my days as an astrophysicist researching black holes, that actually doesn't mean I spend a lot of my time looking at the night sky. So there's always new things to look at, whether you're a beginner or whether you're an old hat at this. So I hope I've inspired you to head out on the next clear night, wrap up warm, especially in winter. You'll be surprised at how just standing still you get very, very cold, and just start seeing what you can find and what you can spot, and maybe see if breaking out the smartphone or breaking out the the big digital camera that you have, plonking it somewhere flat on a table where it's nice and still, and setting it going and just seeing, you know, what the camera reveals to you in the night sky of your back garden. It really is something wonderful, and it's great to do with the family as well, and with the kids during lockdown. It's definitely something that you can help you feel more connected to not just the world around you, but the universe around you as well. And if I've wet your whistle a little bit and you want to hear more, why not join us next Thursday on the Oxford Physics YouTube channel for a live stream of talks, more stargazing tips, and big Q&A panels with all of my colleagues from the astrophysics department, where you can all ask all of your sort of burning spacey questions to both me and my colleagues. And I hope to see you all there. But for now, thank you very much.
Becky, thank you very much indeed for a fantastic talk, which I can tell you has been sending the questions pouring in. We'll only have time today to get through a small number of them. So cunningly, you got your plug in there at the end, and people can pick up the conversation with you on the Physics YouTube channel. But nobody leave us yet, because we've still got 10, 15 minutes in which we can follow up some of the questions that people have. And I think you've not only whetted our appetites, but some of us of a certain age for older cultural references will be making plans for Rigel.
I'm sure.
Now,
and I'm sure the younger ones enjoyed the references to Sirius as well.
I was about to say, I have to look them
Harry
up.
Potter.
But,
yeah.
We're getting a mixture of kind of quite big think questions and rather specific practical ones, Becky. So I'm going to mix it up a little bit, if I may, as I do that, and also throw in one or two of my own, which have come up. But actually, let's start with something really practical. This is coming on Facebook from Chris. Chris asks, where are the best places in the UK for stargazing? And then I think with a sort of forward look towards one day we may be allowed to travel again, where are the best places in the world for stargazing?
Sure. So in the UK, any of the national parks, obviously some of the best. So the best stargazing I've ever done is in the Lake District. I grew up on sort of the south edge of the Lake District, so that was where I went for a lot of family holidays, and I've seen the Milky Way look absolutely spectacular there. But similarly, you know, any national park across the UK will be the best bet, just because it has the darkest skies. We do actually have a dark sky park in the UK, and that is Kielder Forest up in Northumberland. And they actually have an observatory there that you can visit when travel is allowed again. So that might be something that you might wish to plan, because they are fantastic there, and they have fantastic trips you can do, and sort of organized night sky tours as well. And they also have quite a lot of clear night skies as well, being in the northeast, because they don't suffer from relief rainfall like the ones of us who grew up in the northwest do anyway. So clearer nights up on the northeast as well. In terms of the world, again, it's just wherever you can get that's incredibly dark. The places we put telescopes as professional astronomers are places like on tops of mountains in the middle of deserts, basically, because you want somewhere high up and somewhere dry, so you're not looking through as much of the atmosphere. Humidity also gives you a lot of interference with the light as well. So places like Hawaii and the middle of the Chilean desert and South Africa and Australia and the Canary Islands. And there is like legitimate reasons we obviously put them there. It's not just so that we can all have fancy holidays. But I would say anywhere that you can get away from light pollution. So if you are going to the coast, for example, for a beach holiday, then I would say, there might be sort of like hotels or whatever on the front. If you can get away from the lights of the hotels a little bit, just by walking down the beach, for example. Again, be very careful, take lights with you, wrap up warm, that kind of thing. That's a great thing to do. If you're thinking about mountains, holidays, that's another great place to see the sky. But again, it's just about getting away from light pollution.
But don't generally climb mountains in the dark, boys and girls, and
no.
Make sure you've got proper safety. Just a quick follow-up on that. Actually, it combines questions from Sarah and Izzy, who both come in on Facebook as well. But I think about the practicalities.
Yeah.
Sarah's asking, is it necessary to wait for a specific time, or is any time when it's dark okay? And the follow-up, I think probably a lot of people, worry about this from Izzy, is that I don't have a garden, I don't have a telescope. Is there any possibility of stargazing from the window of my flat in the city where there's lots of light, or is it really a bit of a lost cause?
Oh, no. So the first question was, sorry, remember the first question.
Wait for specific, you do have to wait till it's really
times,
dark.
Yes. No, so I mean, waiting till it's dark. So don't look right after sunset, because that will still be what we call twilight. So you'll only really be able to see sort of the brightest stars, or perhaps Venus or something. Have you ever seen a very bright star just after sunset or just before sunrise? That's actually Venus. It's one of the brightest things in the sky. It's all about what's visible then. So for example, I talked about Orion. Orion's visible from about 6 o'clock till about midnight at the minute. So if you're going out in the morning, perhaps, 4 a.m., 5 a.m., perhaps you work nights, something like that, Orion won't be up, but there'll be more to see at that point. So it's all a bit of a balance, right? If you've got something specific in mind, then perhaps download one of those little star chart apps I was talking about and check, if that thing is up at that time that you're going to be looking. But otherwise, just go out and see what you can see. If you're stargazing from a flat or from a house that doesn't have a garden, I do that all the time because I don't want to go outside and get cold. The key to observing inside is making sure all the lights in that room are off, right? So you don't want any light that's going to reflect off your window, for example, and back into your eye, because that's again going to ruin your night vision, if you will. You can do that. I would also recommend like closing the curtains behind you and sort of like being in front of the curtains and looking out that way. That's again another way to stop a lot of reflected light. You need to pick a window that's going to be away from street lamps or anything like that. If you can't do that, I sometimes do this. So if there's a street lamp down there on the road, I'll sort of try and block it with my hands. And that does go a long way in helping to stop that kind of light pollution. If you're in the middle of the city, it's going to be the brightest things only. So for you, it's going to be things like planets like Jupiter and Venus, which are very bright. They're visible early morning at the minute, so right before sunrise, which is not too bad because sunrise is quite late still. It's almost like 7:30 or something like that. So if you're up any earlier, have a look for that. And then also like the winter hexagon that I talked about, the Plough, Orion, the main constellations, you're still going to be able to see, but you're never going to be able to see something like the Milky Way stretching across the sky, that kind of thing.
No, that's fair enough. And actually, I think that may answer the questions that's come in from Ed Jarvis, which is any recommendations for a dad with a space-obsessed 3-year-old? Wow, starting in early. That's great. She loves the planets. And you mentioned Venus is something that in the right circumstances, you might be able to spot, Becky. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, a 3-year-old, definitely, that's just something where if you get a little bit more familiar with the sky, then you can pick things out for them and then show them and point at them, and then they'll get a little bit more from that. Meteor showers are great for young kids. So there's not that many at the minute that are going to be visible in the evening when kids are going to be awake. However, in August, when a lot of people tend to be on summer holidays anyway and away from light pollution, the best meteor shower of the year is the Pleiades. And there's something like 100 meteors an hour. So that's something that you can do with a small kid where you say, come on, we're going to lie down here in the garden or on a sunbed, because we happen to be on holiday. I call them star beds because I use them at nighttime too, because they're great for stargazing. And we're just going to look at the sky and wait for meteors to go across, and it'll be like, oh, look at that one, look at that one. So that's a really good thing to do with a young kid. But also just, feed their curiosity. If they ask questions, try and answer them the best you can. Don't just say, I don't know. It's one of those things that I as a kid was also a why child. like why this, why that, why is the sky blue, that kind of thing. And feeding that is so important at that age.
And I think you're very lucky, Ed, to have that to share with your daughter. Just one very quick factual. I think you mentioned an app during your talk, Becky, and someone is coming on Facebook saying, could you just give us the name of that app for the smartphone again?
There's so many of them. That's the thing that I wouldn't want to necessarily. There's some you can pay for. There's some that are free. Have a little search. There's a load that turn up. See which one you like best.
It's a type of app rather than a specific app.
Exactly. The best ones to get are the ones that turn your phone screen black and light it up with red, and they don't ruin your eyesight the same.
And I'd say likewise to the many people who've actually been writing and asking about specific telescopes. I think we're not in a position to endorse particular commercial enterprises, but in general, I think there are lots of good guides out there to exactly that question. And a reminder that if you wanted to go back over any of Becky's tips during this is, if you're watching live now, this will then be available indefinitely on YouTube as well, so you can always go back and pick up some of the notes. In the last few minutes, Becky, a few of the sort of questions about the science of it as well that's coming in. Actually, one sort of rather nice question about how the science is done, and we've got a couple in here from Russell Borden, but I'm going to ask this one. He mentions Patrick Moore, who many may have known was the most famous astronomer in Britain, I think, for about 70 years or something. Perhaps not 70, but certainly half a century. And he used to say there's a lot that amateur astronomers could add to science or astronomy. Is that still true? Could amateurs do anything that would help scientists like you?
Yeah, 100% actually. Not so much in terms of discovery on the sky always, but if you are a very keen amateur astronomer in terms of discovering things like supernova, things that we call transient that aren't always there in the sky, that appear and then might fade, that's still something amateurs do. But then also we have so many projects online now called citizen science projects. So for example, I work with one called Galaxy Zoo, which is a project which gets the public to classify the shapes of galaxies, because we got in a position where we had took so many images of the sky that we had about 1 million images of galaxies that we wanted to know the shapes of, whether they were a beautiful spiral or whether they were just a blob, because we wanted to study, how do galaxies change shape as the universe evolves? And we couldn't answer that question without being classified. But there's not physically enough of us to look at 1 million galaxies. And that was where we got the public's help with that. And that project is still going. It's been going for about 10 years now, because we don't stop taking pictures of the sky. It's kind of our job. And so that's still something we need help with. That's galaxyzoo.org. And again, that's something that even a 3-year-old could probably do. They can recognize a spiral shape, right? This is something that we're teaching kids to do from a very young age. And that is something where if you get involved, your name is put on scientific publications as well, because that is something you've helped make happen, right? That spawned a lot of other scientific projects like that, from classifying penguins in the Antarctic to translating World War II diaries, to looking at before and after images of places that were hit by hurricanes. For example, Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria a couple of years back, we sort of marked floods and road blockages, things like that. They're all under the banner of something called the Zooniverse. So there's many scientific projects out there that you can get involved with as sort of a keen amateur or citizen scientist.
Fantastic. I think we'll skip past the fascinating question from KWT, which is how much does the ticket cost from London Heathrow to Mars? Because KWT, the answer to that is the ticket is actually quite cheap. You'd be surprised. But the COVID test you need to be able to make sure you don't spread infections to other planets, I'm afraid, is prohibitively expensive.
Astronomical.
So we're going to have to pass that one. Let me finish, Becky, by asking you a question, which is coming for a couple of people, but also actually the thing I wanted to ask you about your own fascinating sounding research on black holes. I mean, it's one of those topics for those of us who get this mostly through the news and kind of popular science press that sort of comes out and then kind of it disappears under the surface of it, and then suddenly this huge new discovery of some sort emerges about black holes. And actually they've been in the news, as you know better than I do, in the last few weeks and months, perhaps more than they had been for a little bit before that. Could I ask the question this way? What's the thing about black holes that we now know from the research that perhaps makes us think about them differently from what we might have thought 2 or 5 years ago even? What's the most recent and kind of science change discovery about them?
I mean, this is the thing about black holes. They will forever be the most mysterious object in the universe because we can't get light and information from them. So there'll always be something we don't know, which excites me to no end. One thing I think we do know now that we didn't necessarily know a couple of years ago was the way black or supermassive black holes anyway grow. So we'd always thought that, yes, okay, they can take in material, but they're not sort of the endless hoovers that people tend to picture when they think of black holes. It's, they can't just take everything in because, stuff happily orbits around them. So the same way the Earth orbits the sun, The sun orbits the center of the Milky Way, where there's a supermassive black hole. We're not falling into that black hole or anything like that. So the black hole was asked to actively take in material. And we thought that that was one way that they would grow. But the major way they would grow was if they merged with another galaxy that also had a supermassive black hole in the center. And so we called this a co-evolution. The galaxy and the black hole would grow together and they would get bigger together. In fact, actually, even some of my research recently has shown that that's not the case. Actually, the majority of black hole growth happens just by the black hole actively taking in material from its surroundings quite calmly, actually, rather than in one of these big violent mergers of two galaxies where gravity tears them apart. So that's one thing that's sort of surprised us recently, is that they're probably not as vicious and violent as we might have thought, and they're a little bit more calmer and controlled.
So when you're looking into the black of the black hole, it's decaf rather than espresso.
Sure, yeah.
Version thereof. Becky, I know from our question section and indeed from my fascination with what you've been talking about, we could talk for ages, but time is against us, and we of course have the pleasure of meeting you again on the Oxford Physics channel and on your own YouTube channel, of course, on many occasions. Thank you so much to Dr. Becky Smethurst of Christchurch, Oxford, for this fantastic talk, and a reminder that you can hear this talk again and all of our previous talks from season 1 and season 2 of Oxford at Home on the website. Just look at the description beneath the video. Next week, we will be talking, all being well, we're still absolutely confirming it, we think it's right, on the history of American insurrections. So that might or might not be timely, as you can imagine, with Professor Nigel Bowles. And please keep looking out, because it may be the time of that is different to accommodate an American audience in particular because of time zones, but it will be the same day, our usual Oxford at Home Friday. Thank you, our audience around the world, for watching. Thank you, Dr. Becky, and thank you, our fantastic team behind the scenes. It's been a pleasure bringing you today's edition of Oxford at Home.